Good morning and welcome to Stitching with Cindy Botts. Today I thought we'd talk about another basic square block that is called log cabin. The log cabin is a very versatile block. There are many different things that you can do with it. There are ways to change the block itself, and there's a lot of different patterns that can be made when you just rearrange the placement of the blocks to make your quilt, wall hanging, table runner, or whatever your project may be. So let's talk first about basic supplies. So you're going to probably want a cutting board. Back when I was first learning to quilt, they would trace their template and cut it out with scissors. Now we have great rotary cutters, different brands. The blades are changeable. Once you dull one, you can put in a new blade. The thing on the market now are these wool pressing mats. They come in different sizes. You can get them at your quilt stores. You can get them on Amazon. There's many different places you can get them. A ruler is very essential to a lot of your quilting now, and you're going to want a nice ruler that has good markings, good clear markings. Squares of different sizes come in handy. This is a 12.5-inch square, and it's great for squaring up your block. Now, I have different sizes of these. Like I showed you in the other video, you can have 2.5-inch blocks for cutting squares, especially 1/2-inch triangles. There are so many different rulers on the market for different purposes. Here is this square also in a smaller size. All right, so they're great for squaring up your project. You're also going to want some pins. The flat head pins, like we talked about in our other video, are great for accidental running over them. I don't recommend that. It is hard on your machine when you run over a needle or a pin. It will possibly break your needle and cause damage to your undercarriage of your machine. So this is called a flathead. It is easier to work with than some of the other pins that are on the market. I love working with clips. Clips are easier for just grabbing hold of, easier on the fingers. This is Jack the Ripper to take apart seams. We all make mistakes. If you don't make mistakes with your sewing, you haven't been sitting there long enough at the machine. So those are some things to keep in mind. You want your fabric scissors, good pair of fabric scissors that you do not use for other things. For the block I made today, I used some crayons. You could also use colored pencils, markers. It is part of the go-to things in my sewing room. I also used a Sharpie marker and a pencil, and I'll show you how I use those to plan my block. Now, for actually writing on the material, you can get markers and pens and different things that are heat or friction dissolvable, and they will erase off your fabric. So you can look into that on Amazon, quilt stores. A lot of different places have these different types of pens that you can get. Some are you wash it and it goes away. Others are heat sensitive. Same with like interfacings. You can get many different kinds of interfacings that dissolve. So tip number 1, for doing any kind of create your own patterns, especially things that you're trying to figure out lengths of, how they're going to go together, I really recommend just buying a notebook that has grids on it, a graph paper notebook. Graph paper works wonderful. So we're going to talk about the planning of this square. So let me just kind of show you this square again. This one I use 2 different colors. This is the log cabin square block, the log cabin block. Traditionally, the log cabin block had a red center, and that was to symbolize the fireplace in the home, the center point for the heat for the home where most of their gathering would be. So that was why that was a warm red color. Also, typically, the log cabin block is made with a light side and a darker side. Okay, so those are a couple traditional things. Now, when you're sewing your strips and cutting your strips, typically the 2 colors, the 2 sides, are made with strips that are the same width to get the traditional log cabin block. You can do other things with it to make the block have a curved appearance, and that is by changing the width of one of the sides. And I mean this side and this side, you know, the 1/2. So the 1/2, the 2 sides. And then the other 2 sides would be a different, wider placement. So that's a pattern for another time. The other thing that people do is sometimes they put a square here and a square here and a square here, giving you a diagonal of color on the block. Again, those are all variations of this basic log cabin block. And then there are all sorts of ways that you can change the center block, making it larger, making the center block a star, making the center block a 4-patch, a 9-patch, a heart. There are so many different things that this pattern, this block, can be used for. Again, this is just a basic, traditional log cabin block that we're talking about today. And then there is the placement of the blocks. When you go to sew your blocks together, you can do a barn raising pattern, you can do diagonal patterns. There is just a lot of versatility once you learn this basic block. All right, so let's talk about it. So for this block, I chose to use a 2.5-inch wide strip. So I started with this block here, which is 2.5 by 2.5. I added this 2.5-inch by 2.5-inch square to start my blue round, my first round. Again, traditionally this would be red. I want my square to be half white and half shades of blue. And then this piece is sewn on, then this piece, and you work around. Then this piece, then this piece, and this piece, then this piece. All right, and you just go work around. Okay, so it goes around and around. So you start with this one, then this one, 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 and this one. They just go around and around and around. Okay. So when you're sewing it, you want to try to be as accurate as you can with your 1/4-inch seam. As you're sewing in your rounds and your rows, it is pretty likely, at least in my experience, that the 1/4-inch seam or the way I pull my fabric, I might have a little extra left. And what I suggest that you do with that is just take your square block over to your iron and press down your seams, and just using your square up ruler, just square it up. Now, sometimes what you can do is when you go to sew this onto your block, when you go to sew the seam on, have this piece that's just that fraction of an inch longer than what your block is be on the downside, on the bottom. And the way the feed dogs pull the material through, a lot of times that will even it out. The other thing you can do is just make sure that you have it pinned or clipped. I like the clip method. Clipped at one end and start sewing at the other end, so that your tension of when you're running your strips through is more consistent. A lot of times I'm just in the groove in the moment, and my tension and the way I'm running my squares through is not consistent, and I do end up with these hangovers, and tends to make you need to go over to the iron, press it, and trim it. But it is always good to square up your project as you go. Okay, so that's another little tip. Now, some people like to cut their strips into the measured lengths first. I think that's a great idea. Not everyone likes to do that. A lot of people just sew a long strip onto it and then cut it. Okay, sometimes that can make your block a little wonky, as again you pull it a little tighter or not as tight, you run it a little faster, and the feed dogs don't keep a consistent tension on the material. Just a thing to point out. Again, I did this at a 1/4 inch seam. You have the foot that you can buy. If you do not have a 1/4 inch foot, I recommend that you buy one. A lot of people like to put the tape down on their machine. There's also like a plastic mat that you can put on your machine. I think it's like a sticker that can go down. The other thing that I want to recommend to you is extending your workspace. My machine actually ends here. Okay, so this is just an extension that I bought. It has legs underneath it, as you can see, that raise it up so that when you're working, your work is at a more consistent level and it's not pulling. Otherwise, the actual weight of your project can pull and distort things also. So that's another quick tip for you. So, how do you figure out the length? Again, some people just cut the 2.5 inch strips, the 1.5 inch strips, 3.5 inch wide, however you want the width to be, and just sew. And that's fine if you want to do that. Again, you want to just be careful that you keep a nice square and that you go around in your clockwise or counterclockwise pattern, whichever you choose. So on the graph paper, it makes it so much easier to know what you're doing, at what length, in what order. So here's my starting block, 2 by 2. And then we just need to remember that you also have to have the 1/2 inch allotment for a 1/4 inch on this side, a 1/4 inch on this side, 1/4 inch, and 1/4 inch. So a 2.5 inch square. Another 2.5 inch square. This will be the next row. All right, so you just extend it out, and you know that this will be another 2.5. You can count that one too, 2 by 2. Perfect. So simple. Then again, here we go. The next, we're going to go around this way in our pattern. So we go A, B, then we add C. B and C would be either the same shade, or if you're doing lights and darks, these would be the lights, these would be the darks, or vice versa. You know, just pick the side that you want to be. So C is equal to the length of B and the length of A. There you go. 2 and 2 is 4, plus the seam allowance, 4.5. There you go. And now C and D are going to be the same, because again, you have the width and the width, 2.5 by 2.5, minus the seam allowance. So it's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus the seam allowance. So that gives you 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. Again, you just keep going around and around to build your square. I hope this gives you lots of insights, and I hope that you enjoy making your log cabin squares. Thanks again. Have a great day. Bye-bye.